Where the Hearts Returns. Part 1. The Return to Maplewood. The old house on Willow Lane looked smaller than Eleanor remembered. As she stepped out of the rental car, the crunch of gravel under her feet sent a wave of nostalgia crashing over her. The air smelled of damp leaves and wood smoke, a scent so familiar it felt like traveling back in time. She hadn't been here in 30 years, not since she left Maplewood, Wisconsin, for a life that promised more than this quiet town ever could. Now, at 58, she was back, not by choice but by necessity. Her divorce had been finalized 6 months ago, and the small inheritance from her late Aunt Margaret was the only thing keeping her afloat. The house, a 2-story Victorian with peeling white paint and a sagging porch, was hers now. It was a reminder of summers spent chasing fireflies and winters huddled by the fireplace, but it was also a symbol of everything she'd run from. "Mom, are you sure about this?" Her daughter, Claire, leaned against the car, arms crossed. At 28, Claire had inherited her father's practicality and her mother's stubbornness. "You could sell it, you know. It's not like you owe anyone here anything." Eleanor shook her head, though she wasn't entirely sure herself. "It's not about owing anyone, Claire. It's about starting over. This place, it's where I came from. Maybe it's where I need to be now." Claire sighed but didn't argue. She'd flown in from Chicago to help her mom settle in, but her skepticism was palpable. Maplewood, with its population of 3,000 and its one traffic light, was a far cry from the city life Claire thrived in. Together, they unloaded the car and dragged Eleanor's suitcases up the creaky steps. The front door stuck at first, but with a firm shove, it groaned open, revealing a foyer filled with dust and memories. The furniture was still there, covered in sheets that had turned yellow with age. Eleanor ran a hand over the banister, the wood smooth beneath her fingers. She could almost hear her aunt's laughter, feel the warmth of the home that had once been her sanctuary. "This is going to take forever," Claire muttered, waving a hand in front of her face to clear the dust. Eleanor smiled faintly. "It's not so bad. A little cleaning, a fresh coat of paint. It'll feel like home again." But as she walked through the rooms, she wasn't so sure. The kitchen was a time capsule of faded linoleum and avocado green appliances. The living room, with its floral wallpaper and threadbare sofa, felt like a museum of a life she'd left behind. Upstairs, the bedrooms were filled with relics of her childhood: a box of old records, a dress she'd worn to a high school dance, a collection of pressed flowers in a notebook. Memories flooded back, unbidden and relentless. She remembered the last time she'd been in this house, the night she'd told Aunt Margaret she was leaving for New York. Her aunt had been heartbroken but had hidden it behind a brave smile. "You'll come back someday," she'd said. "Maplewood has a way of calling people home." Eleanor hadn't believed her then. Now, standing in the quiet of the house, she wondered if her aunt had been right. That evening, after Claire had gone to bed, Eleanor sat on the porch with a cup of tea, the cool autumn air wrapping around her like a blanket. The town was quiet, the kind of quiet that felt comforting and unsettling. In the distance, she could see the faint glow of Main Street, the diner and the hardware store still standing after all these years. As she sipped her tea, a figure appeared at the end of the driveway. At first, Eleanor thought it was a trick of the light, but as the person drew closer, she realized it was a man, older, with salt and pepper hair and a slight limp. He stopped at the edge of the porch, squinting up at her. "Eleanor, is that really you?" His voice was rough but warm. She hesitated, then recognition hit her like a bolt of lightning. "Tom? Tom Callahan?" He grinned, the boyish charm of his youth still evident despite the lines on his face. "In the flesh. I heard someone was moving into Margaret's place, but I didn't think it'd be you. What brought you back?" Eleanor set her tea down, her hands trembling slightly. "Life, I guess. I needed a change." Tom nodded as if that explained everything. "Well, welcome back. Maplewood's not much, but it's home. If you need anything, let me know." She smiled, a genuine smile this time. "Thanks, Tom. It's good to see a friendly face." As he walked away, Eleanor felt a strange sense of reassurance. Maybe Maplewood wasn't the end of the road after all. Maybe it was a new beginning. Part 3. The Mystery of the Photo. That evening, Claire returned from her walk with a bag of takeout from Joe's Diner. "Betty insisted," she said, setting the bag on the kitchen table. "She says hi, by the way." Eleanor smiled, grateful for the gesture. They ate together, Claire recounting her exploration of the town. "It's cute, in a very small town kind of way," she said, dipping a fry in ketchup. "But I still don't get why you want to stay here." "It's hard to explain," Eleanor said, stirring the remnants of her soup. "There's something about this place that feels grounding, like I'm supposed to be here." Claire gave her a skeptical look, but didn't press. Instead, she asked, "What's the plan for tomorrow?" Eleanor hesitated, then brought out the photo album. "I was thinking we could try to figure out who this man is. Aunt Margaret never mentioned him, and I'm curious." Claire's eyes lit up. "A mystery. Count me in." The next morning, they started their investigation at the Maplewood Historical Society, a small brick building on the edge of town. The librarian, a woman named Mrs. Hargrove, with glasses that seemed too large for her face, greeted them warmly. "Eleanor Carter," she said, shaking Eleanor's hand. "I remember you. You used to come here to study after school." Eleanor blinked, surprised. "You have a good memory, Mrs. Hargrove." "It's hard to forget a face," Mrs. Hargrove said, with a smile. "Now, what can I help you with?" Eleanor showed her the photo. "Do you know who this man is?" Mrs. Hargrove squinted at the picture, then adjusted her glasses. "Why, that's Henry Whitmore. He was a teacher here in the 60s and 70s. He and Margaret were quite close from what I remember." Eleanor's heart skipped a beat. "Close?" Mrs. Hargrove nodded. "Oh, yes, they were inseparable for years. I always thought they'd get married. But then, well, Henry left town. No one knows why. Margaret never talked about it." Eleanor exchanged a glance with Claire. "Do you know where he went?" Mrs. Hargrove shook her head. "He just disappeared. But if anyone knows more, it'd be Tom Callahan. He and Henry were good friends." Thanking Mrs. Hargrove, Eleanor and Claire left the library. "Well, that's interesting," Claire said, as they walked back to the house. "So, Aunt Margaret had a lost love. That's kind of romantic." Eleanor nodded, though her mind was racing. Why had Henry left, and why had Margaret never mentioned him? Later that afternoon, they found Tom at his hardware store, sorting through a shipment of tools. He looked up as they entered, his face lighting up with a smile. "Eleanor! Claire! What brings you two here?" "We were hoping you could help us with something." Eleanor showed him the photo. "Do you remember Henry Whitmore?" Tom's smile faded, and he took the photo with trembling hands. "Henry," he said softly. "Of course I remember him. Best friend I ever had." "Do you know why he left town?" Claire asked. Tom sighed, leaning against the counter. "It's a long story. Henry and Margaret were in love, but things got complicated. Henry had a brother, David, who was troubled. One night there was an accident. David died, and Henry blamed himself. He couldn't stay here after that. Said he couldn't face Margaret or anyone in town." Eleanor felt a pang of sadness. "Did Margaret know?" Tom nodded. "She'd tried to stop him, but he wouldn't listen. He left without a word. Margaret was heartbroken. She never got over him, but she never talked about him either." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. "I never knew." Tom gave her a sympathetic look. "Margaret was a strong woman. She carried that pain with her, but she never let it define her." Claire, who had been silent until now, spoke up. Do you know where Henry is now? Tom shook his head. Last I heard, he moved out west somewhere, but that was years ago. I'm not even sure if he's still alive. As they left the hardware store, Eleanor felt a mix of emotions: sadness for her aunt's loss, curiosity about Henry's fate, and a strange sense of purpose. She turned to Claire. I think we need to find him. Claire raised an eyebrow. How? It's not like we have much to go on. We'll figure it out, Eleanor said, her determination growing. This feels important. That night, Eleanor sat on the porch with a cup of tea, the photo album in her lap. She flipped through the pages, studying the pictures of Margaret and Henry. They looked so happy, so full of life. What would her life have been like if Henry had stayed? Would Margaret have been different? Would she have been different? As the stars twinkled overhead, Eleanor felt a sense of clarity. This wasn't just about uncovering the past, it was about understanding her aunt, her own roots, and perhaps even herself. Part 4. The Search Begins. The next morning, Eleanor and Claire sat at the kitchen table, a map of the United States spread out in front of them. Claire had brewed a pot of coffee, and the aroma filled the room as they brainstormed where to start. So, Tom said Henry went out west, Claire said, tracing a line across the map with her finger. That's like half the country. How are we supposed to narrow it down? Eleanor sipped her coffee, her brow furrowed in thought. Tom mentioned something about the 70s. Maybe we can start by looking for records from that time. Census data, phone directories, anything that might give us a clue. Claire groaned, leaning back in her chair. This is going to take forever. Probably, Eleanor admitted with a small smile. But what else do we have to do? Claire sighed, but didn't argue. Instead, she pulled out her laptop and started searching online. Eleanor, meanwhile, called the local courthouse to see if they had any records from that era. After a few hours, they had a list of possibilities. Henry Whitmore had been listed in directories in Arizona, California, and Colorado in the late 1970s and early 1980s. Okay, Claire said, reading from her notes. The last address we have for him is in Denver, Colorado in 1985. That's over 30 years ago, but it's a starting point. Eleanor nodded, feeling a spark of hope. Then that's where we'll start. The drive to Denver took 2 days, with Claire taking the wheel for most of the trip. They listened to old playlists, Claire's mix of indie rock and Eleanor's favorite 70s classics, and stopped at roadside diners along the way. It felt strange being on the road with her daughter, but Eleanor cherished the time together. When they finally arrived in Denver, they headed to the address Claire had found. It was an apartment building in a quiet neighborhood, the kind of place that had seen better days. Eleanor parked the car, her heart pounding as they approached the building. The manager, a middle-aged woman with a friendly smile, greeted them at the door. "Can I help you?" Eleanor explained, showing her a copy of the old directory. "Henry Whitmore." "Do you remember him?" The manager shook her head. "Sorry, hun, I've only been here for 10 years, but you might try Mrs. Jenkins in 2B. She's been here forever." Thanking her, they knocked on Mrs. Jenkins' door. An elderly woman with bright blue eyes and a walker answered, peering at them curiously. "Yes?" Eleanor said, "We're looking for Henry Whitmore. He lived here in the 80s. Do you remember him?" Mrs. Jenkins' eyes lit up. "Henry? Of course I remember him. Sweet man, always had a smile on his face. He moved out in the late 80s, though. Said he was going to Montana to start over." Eleanor's heart skipped a beat. "Do you know where in Montana?" Mrs. Jenkins shook her head. "I'm afraid not, but he talked about the mountains a lot. Maybe somewhere near Glacier National Park?" It wasn't much to go on, but it was a lead. Thanking Mrs. Jenkins, Eleanor and Claire returned to the car. "Montana," Claire groaned, slumping in her seat. "That's like another 1,000 miles." Eleanor laughed, patting her daughter's hand. "It's an adventure." The next morning, they set out for Montana. The drive was long but beautiful, the landscape changing from cityscapes to rolling plains to towering mountains. As they approached Glacier National Park, Eleanor couldn't help but feel a sense of awe. It was easy to see why Henry might have chosen this place. They stopped in small towns along the way, asking at gas stations, diners, and post offices if anyone remembered Henry Whitmore. Most people shook their heads, but a few recalled a man that matched his description. Tall, gray hair, kind of quiet? Yeah, he used to come in here every now and then. Lives up in the mountains somewhere. With each clue, Eleanor felt closer to finding Henry. Finally, in the town of Whitefish, they struck gold. A librarian recognized Henry's name immediately. "Henry Whitmore?" she said, pulling out a local directory. "He lives up in the woods about 10 miles from here. Keeps to himself, but he's a regular at the farmer's market on Saturdays." Eleanor's hands trembled as she wrote down the address. "Thank you so much." As they drove up the winding mountain road, Claire glanced at her mother. "Are you nervous?" Eleanor nodded, her heart racing. "I don't know what to expect. What if he doesn't want to see us? What if he's not even the same person?" Claire reached over and squeezed her hand. "We'll find out soon enough." Finally, they reached a small cabin nestled in the woods, smoke curling from the chimney. Eleanor parked the car and took a deep breath, her nerves on edge. Together they walked up the path to the front door. Eleanor knocked, the sound echoing in the quiet forest. For a moment, there was silence. Then the door creaked open and a man appeared, tall, with gray hair and kind eyes. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice soft but steady. Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. It was him, Henry Whitmore. "Henry," she said, her voice trembling. "I'm Eleanor, Margaret Carter's niece." His eyes widened, and for a moment he looked as though he'd seen a ghost. Then, slowly, a smile spread across his face. "Eleanor," he said softly, "I've been wondering when you'd find me." Part 5. A conversation long overdue. Henry invited them inside, his cabin warm and cozy with the scent of pine and wood smoke. The walls were lined with bookshelves, and a fire crackled in the stone fireplace. He gestured for them to sit on the couch, then disappeared into the kitchen. "Can I get you anything? Tea? Coffee?" "Tea would be lovely," Eleanor said, still feeling a bit overwhelmed. Claire, sitting beside her, whispered, "This is surreal. He's exactly as I pictured him." Eleanor nodded, her heart racing. She wasn't sure what she'd expected, but Henry's calm, gentle demeanor put her at ease. He returned with a tray of steaming mugs and set it on the coffee table. "I'm afraid I don't get many visitors. This is a pleasant surprise." Eleanor took a sip of her tea, gathering her thoughts. "Henry, I don't even know where to start. I found photos of you and Aunt Margaret in her house, and, well, I guess I just wanted to know more about you, about your story." Henry's smile faded slightly, and he looked into the fire, his expression thoughtful. "Margaret," he said softly, almost reverently. "She was the love of my life." Eleanor's breath caught. "What happened? Why did you leave?" Henry sighed, running a hand through his gray hair. "It's a long story, but I suppose you deserve to hear it. My brother, David, was troubled. He struggled with addiction, and it drove a wedge between us. One night, he was in an accident. I blamed myself for not being there for him. I was so consumed by guilt that I couldn't stay in Maplewood. I felt like I didn't deserve Margaret, or the life we could have had." Eleanor's heart ached for him. "But Margaret loved you. She would have stood by you." Henry nodded, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. I know that now. But back then, I was too broken to see it. I left without saying goodbye, thinking it was for the best. It wasn't. I've regretted it every day since. Claire, who had been silent until now, spoke up. Did you ever try to reach out to her? Henry shook his head. After a while, I convinced myself it was too late. I thought she'd moved on, found someone else. I didn't want to disrupt her life. Eleanor reached into her bag and pulled out the photo album, opening it to the page with Henry and Margaret's picture. She never moved on, Henry. She kept these photos all her life. Henry took the album with trembling hands, his eyes lingering on Margaret's smiling face. I should have gone back, he whispered. I should have fought for her. Eleanor felt tears prick her own eyes. She never stopped loving you, and I think she'd want you to know that. Henry closed the album and handed it back to her. Thank you for bringing this to me. It means more than you know. They sat in silence for a while, the crackling fire the only sound in the room. Finally, Claire broke the quiet. So, why Montana? Why did you choose this place? Henry smiled faintly. The mountains reminded me of her. She always loved nature, said it made her feel free. I thought maybe here, surrounded by the beauty she loved, I could find some peace. Eleanor nodded, understanding. She was like that. She used to take me hiking when I was a kid, taught me to appreciate the little things, wildflowers, bird song, the smell of fresh air. Henry's smile deepened. That sounds like her. As the afternoon turned into evening, they talked for hours, about Margaret, about Maplewood, about the lives they'd built since. Henry shared stories of his years as a teacher in Denver, and Claire told him about her life in Chicago. Eleanor listened, feeling a strange sense of closure. Finally, as the sun dipped below the mountains, Henry stood up. Would you like to stay for dinner? I'm not much of a cook, but I can make a mean spaghetti. Eleanor smiled. We'd love to. Over dinner, they laughed and talked like old friends. It felt natural, as if Henry had always been a part of their lives. When it was time to go, Henry walked them to the door. Thank you for finding me, he said, his voice thick with emotion. It's good to know that Margaret's memory lives on. Eleanor reached out and squeezed his hand. Thank you for sharing your story with us. It means the world to me. As they drove back to town, Claire glanced at her mother. So, what now? Eleanor thought for a moment. I think it's time to go home. But not just to Maplewood, to the memories of Aunt Margaret, the life she built, and the love she left behind. Claire smiled. Sounds like a plan. Part 6. Coming Home. The drive back to Maplewood was slower than the journey out. They took back roads, stopping at roadside attractions and small-town diners along the way. Henry rode with them, his presence adding a sense of quiet wisdom to the trip. Eleanor watched him in the rearview mirror, his face relaxed but thoughtful as he gazed out the window. You haven't been back to Maplewood in decades, have you? Eleanor asked, breaking the comfortable silence. Henry shook his head. Not since I left. I always thought it would be too painful, too full of memories. But now, he trailed off, his smile soft. Now, I think it's time. Margaret deserves that. Claire glanced at him in the rearview mirror. What do you think you'll do when we get there? Henry chuckled. First, I'll probably get a milkshake at Joe's Diner. Then, I'd like to visit Margaret's grave. It's long overdue. Eleanor nodded, her heart swelling with emotion. She'd want you there. As they crossed the town line, Eleanor felt a mix of excitement and nostalgia. Maplewood looked the same as ever, quiet, unassuming, but full of life. They drove past the diner, the hardware store, and finally to Willow Lane. The house looked different now. Over the past weeks, Eleanor and Claire had worked hard to restore it, giving it a fresh coat of paint and clearing out the overgrown yard. It wasn't perfect, but it felt like home. "Welcome back," Eleanor said as they pulled into the driveway. Henry stepped out of the car, his eyes scanning the house and the yard. "It looks just like I remember," he said, his voice tinged with awe. "Margaret would be proud." Inside, they settled Henry into the guest room, then gathered in the kitchen for tea. The afternoon sunlight streamed through the windows, casting a warm glow over the room. Eleanor couldn't help but feel a sense of completeness, as if the missing piece of the puzzle had finally been found. The next morning, they visited Margaret's grave. It was a quiet spot under a maple tree, the leaves a brilliant shade of gold. Henry stood for a long time, his hand resting on the headstone. "Hello, Margaret. I'm sorry it took me so long to come back." Eleanor and Claire stood a few steps behind, giving him space. After a while, he turned to them, his eyes glistening with tears. "I'm sorry it took me so long to come back," he said. "Thank you for bringing me here. It's exactly what I needed." That evening, they hosted a dinner at the house, inviting Betty, Tom, and a few other old friends from town. The house was filled with laughter and stories, the warmth of community bringing it to life. Henry fit in seamlessly, his quiet humor and gentle presence a perfect match for the group. As the night wound down, Eleanor found herself on the porch, watching the stars. Henry joined her, a steaming mug of tea in his hand. "It's been a long time since I felt this at peace," he said, leaning against the railing. "Thank you, Eleanor, for everything." She smiled, her heart full. "Thank you, Henry, for coming back, for helping me understand Aunt Margaret in a way I never could have on my own." He nodded, gazing out at the quiet town. "You know, I think I'd like to stay here, if you'll have me." Eleanor turned to him, surprise and joy lighting up her face. "Of course, Henry, you're family now." He smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Then it's settled. I'm home." And so Eleanor, Claire, and Henry began a new chapter in Maplewood, a town that had a way of weaving people's lives together. It wasn't perfect, but it was real, a place where the past and the present intertwined, where love and loss and hope found their rhythm. And as the seasons changed, so did they, growing stronger, braver, and more connected than ever. The end.